morning. All right, I think I've saved the best hospice story for last, and I didn't do that intentionally. It's kind of how it worked out. It's going to be a little bit multifaceted. I don't want to keep telling hospice stories because it's going to start getting to where I'm starting to tell war stories, and I don't want to do that. So I wanted this to be focused on helping people deal with their own mortality and their loved ones, and try to help them make it better, or as peaceful and loving as possible. So I've got multiple examples on this one, but basically it's the struggle to come to peace with your death, to be at peace with your dying. I had, like I said, multiple experiences with this one. A lot of people, self-included, have faced death and not been at peace, and it's extremely disturbing and terrifying, and not a place you want to be. So I've also seen people who faced their death and were miraculously at peace. And I'll tell you, the key to that, in my opinion and observation and experience, is a clear conscience. Because there have been times where I felt at peace even though I was in deadly danger, and then there were other times where I was terrified and I was not having a good time, and I wasn't ready to go. So I've seen that in all my hospice patients. Some of them are ready to go, some of them aren't. Some of their families are ready to let go, and some of them are not. And the ones who are not ready to let go are the most heart-wrenching. They're the most traumatic and difficult. This one guy, he was an Air Force veteran like myself, and he had COPD. He couldn't get his breath. And I don't know, as a firefighter, I've experienced that many times. If you've never not been able to catch your breath, it's terrifying, naturally. And it's not something that you can control. Your brain kind of takes over and says, hey, I need to breathe. I can't breathe. And that's why they use it as a torture, and waterboarding, and a lot of other forms of torture. Crucifixion is another one that does that. Is because it's a torture. And this poor guy, he was on max oxygen. He was on anti-anxiety medications, but he was so anxious that he could not sleep. The only time he slept was when he would become so exhausted that he couldn't stay awake. And it was only for short spurts. It wasn't. I was there, when somebody gets really close to the dying and they're like that, we pull 24-hour hospice care. So there's always somebody sitting there with them trying to comfort them. And that's what we did for this guy. He was so adamant about trying to hold on to life for every moment that he could, that it was, even just talking about it right now, it's traumatizing for me a little bit. So, yeah, I have a thing with, I connect with people, and it makes it hard. Hold on a second, I gotta get my breakfast.
Hi, can I help you?
Yeah, can I get a sourdough breakfast sandwich and a medium hot chocolate?
And a medium hot coffee?
No, hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate. Okay, then. Anything else?
That's it. Thank you.
I see the window. Thank you.
So yeah, after a few days of that, some things I can't tell you. Some things I just can't tell you. But yeah, that was pretty traumatic. There's other ones too. There's lots of them, actually. When I was a kid, there was a lady who had been through the Holocaust, and my parents worked in nursing homes. That's part of the reason why I got into it. I used to help the old folks before and after school while I was waiting for my mom to get off work. And this one old lady she was out of her mind. She had been in a concentration camp. She had the tattoo on her forearm. And she had obviously been abused and molested multiple times. And she was just, the poor thing, she was just out of her mind. She was in her own hell. It's really, I've seen it many times. Another was a former bank president. She was in a group home. She was in a really nice group home, but she had dementia, Alzheimer's, and she was extremely anxious, and she couldn't hardly relax. And I felt bad for her because she could kind of communicate a little bit, but she would get garbled and confused. And a lot of them, you turn back into childhood when you get older. A lot of people do, not everybody, but you become childlike. And especially with dementia patients, and they get confused and they don't know where they are, and they want to go home, and they want their husband or their mom or their dad or whatever. They don't know, and they don't know who you are, and they're just scared all the time. That's really sad. I've seen people like that who have tried to keep their family members at home. I know of one old country farmer guy who tried to keep his wife at home, was an Alzheimer's patient. And, of course he couldn't keep up with her all the time and do his farm work. So he would tie her up, which sounds barbaric, but he would tie her up. And there was a time or two that she got away and got in a car and got lost, and the cops had to find her. And she'd drive around, she didn't know where she was, and brought her home. And that's not ideal. It was extremely difficult, not only for her. I mean, she was probably going to be more at peace at home with him than in a nursing home for sure, but he can't keep up that kind of care. Good morning.
Have a good day.
Thank you. I don't know if I told this one out loud or if I did it in writing to somebody else, but I had a Korean War veteran who was afraid of dying. He was a paratrooper, and he had survived, he was like one of 11 people in his unit that survived, or maybe I'm confusing him with another veteran, but in North Korea, in the North Korean War, there was a lot of atrocities and horrible conditions. My stepfather was a Korean War vet too. Maybe he was the one that survived 11 out of his unit. A lot of his guys froze to death. But he was afraid of dying, this paratrooper was. He had done some bad things in his life, and he was having a conversation with me one day. He was dying of cancer, and he's like, I'm scared. When you're a caregiver, a CNA, you get much more intimate than they do with their own family. And so a lot of times they'll open up to you and tell you things they won't tell their own family. And he was living at home with his daughter. And he opened up to me one day and told me he was scared of dying. And I had been skydiving, and so I told him, he said he just wished he'd go ahead and die because he just felt like he was useless, but he was scared. And I said, well, you're not useless, because while you're laying here, you can pray for other people that you care for, and those prayers help. It matters. I mean, love is what matters in the end. And number two, if a screwed up person like myself, sinful person like myself, loves you and cares for you the way I do, oh, what do you think a perfect God's going to do? Repent of whatever you've done wrong, and repent of it, and pray and ask His forgiveness and ask His help, and have hope and faith in Him. You can't save yourself, but you can hope that He'll save you. And that seemed to help a little bit. And then I said, as far as being scared of dying, I completely understand. The way I look at it, and I have not died, so it's not for me to say. I don't want to be prideful, but I've come close multiple times. And no, it's not something that I feel comfortable with. I get anxious just thinking about it. It's natural to be scared, but you got to have faith in God, who loves us and has provided everything that we have. Every breath we've taken, every heartbeat, everything of good that we've had in our lives, all our love and relationships, everything, health. We got to have some faith in that, and it's difficult to do because there's a lot of bad in the world too, a lot of trauma, and then we have our own faults that makes us feel unworthy, and of course we're fighting against demons who get into our head and like a squirrel in an attic and start trying to chew up our wires and make us a little nutty and not trust ourselves, which we shouldn't trust ourselves. That's the whole point of what I'm trying to say, is we're trusting God. So jumping out of that plane, when you're dying, it's kind of the same thing. You don't have any control, and you just got to let go. And I said, once you were out of the plane and your chute was open, it was fine, right? For the most part. I mean, other than the potential of enemies shooting at you in his case. But after it was over, it all worked out. And he agreed with that. He understood what I was saying. He thought that was a good analogy. So hopefully that helps somebody. That's not perfect, but you get the idea. So that's another example. I knew another guy who was friends with Al Capone. He was friends with Al and Frank Capone, and he used to take them on boat rides on Lake Michigan. He had his own service, fishing company or whatever. He would take people on fishing trips. And he was a former boxer, professional boxer. And one day Frank and Al got into a fight on the boat, and I can't remember which one did what, but I think it was Frank got the big fish hook, the big hook on the pole that they pull the fish up out of the water from the side of the boat, because these are bigger boats. He got one of those and was going to hook his brother Al with it and kill him because they were fighting. And of course Al was going to tear him to pieces, and this guy jumped in between them and stopped him, and it was just enough to break up the fight and to calm things down. Al Capone pulled him aside later and said, if you ever get between me and my brother again, I will kill you. Well, that sounds about right. Long story short, I just thought it was interesting that this guy was in that situation. This guy, when he was on his deathbed, was having the same kind of struggles. He wasn't comfortable with his conscience, and he was very, very anxious, and he wore out his family members trying to get their comfort. And I don't know that sometimes I don't think you can be comforted when you're dying, and things they're just not good, you know. I've had situations like that where I've been sick and I just could not get comfortable, and it was a struggle. So that's another example. The psychologist or sociologist finally had to sit down with him one day and kind of reprimand him for being so selfish, which I thought was kind of harsh, but it seemed to work. It kind of made him depressed, if you ask me, but he chewed into him for being so hard on his family, wanting so much attention. There was another story from my childhood that I didn't witness directly, but my parents did. I was around, but I didn't actually see this situation. This one lady was dying, and as she was dying, she was screaming. Evidently, she saw demons coming to get her, and she was screaming for them to get away from her. And like for the last 30 seconds or so before she died, which is pretty horrific and traumatic to think about. And I've heard other stories like that. I think Stalin, that Russian leader, when he died, he kind of had a similar experience. I've also seen the opposite. I've also seen people when they're dying being greeted by people and having conversations and going with them peacefully. My father was like that. My father, his death was miraculous. It was probably the most beautiful death I've ever seen, and I have no doubt he went to heaven based on everything I know about him and everything I saw. It was pretty miraculous. So, I mean, I shouldn't judge. I don't mean to judge. You know, God knows. But everything I saw indicated that he struggled with the demons right before his death, and then he was granted heaven because, well, let me just describe it real quick. I got 17 minutes. I got a little bit of time. So my father was dying of multiple things. He was in a monastery, and he knew he was going to die because he had been on dialysis, and he had gotten spinal cancer. It had gotten into his spinal cord, and it was going to be so excruciating and unsurvivable that it was decided just to stop his dialysis and go naturally. So they gave him a morphine drip pump. You know, it automatically gives him a shot of morphine every so often. Not enough to knock him out, but enough to just take the edge off. And he basically he just fasted. He didn't eat or drink hardly anything at all for the whole week that we were there at the monastery. And he was so peaceful and happy despite all of his suffering. It was kind of miraculous by itself. The night that he died, I thought he had died several times because I'd seen quite a bit of it, and he looked like a mummy. He looked like he was dead, but he wasn't. And then finally, shortly after dawn, if I recall correctly, which I could be off, my memory's not that great anymore, but he woke up with a start. Now, he was basically a skeleton at this point, and he had no strength, and he had been not eating or drinking for like a whole week. So how is he going to have this energy? I don't know. But he jumped up out of bed, like not out of bed, but jumped up in bed, sat up, and yelled out no. And the way he did it, it looked like he had been hit by somebody with a rod, like somebody had taken a staff and just whacked him really good on the back and knocked him up out of bed. And this happened multiple times, for about 5 minutes or so. I got up immediately and reassured my father to hold on and keep praying, and I went and stood at the foot of his bed so he could see me, and I started praying to canon to the Theotokos, the Mother of God, praying for him. And I wanted him to be able to see me and hear me, to help him. You know, it was because like he was at the end of his race. And this went on for a while, and he was looking around. He couldn't see what was hitting him or what was going on, but he felt like, I could tell he knew something was up and somebody was messing with him. So of course we assume it's a demon, so obviously. So I kept praying, and my sister was there and my daughter was there. They all saw this too. And as I was about halfway through the prayers, all of a sudden my father looked over at the window and tracked somebody walking into the room that we couldn't see, until they tracked right to where I was standing. And I'm assuming it was the Mother of God. I don't know. And he had a look of awe and wonder on his face, but it was just like surprise, you know. And then a few moments later, as I'm reading, his eyes got, all of a sudden they got huge, really big, and he's looking around like he's seeing heaven, like he's seeing, like a little child seeing Disney World or something times 10. He was just really awestruck, and he had the face of a child at that moment, even though he was, you know, looking really old, like he was dying. But he looked like a little innocent child, and this look on his face, and he was looking around, and it was like he was looking at different people, and he was surprised to see them. And then he closed his mouth, because he had opened his mouth in awe, shock, scared. He was breathing, labored too. And he closed his mouth, crossed his hands on his chest, and closed his eyes. And at that moment he died. My sister is a nurse, and she was checking his pulse at that time. She had given him an extra shot of morphine. It didn't knock him out. It didn't seem to do anything. And she mouthed to me that he was gone, and I nodded my head, but I kept reading the prayers. I didn't want to stop. I finished the prayers for him. And yeah, that was the most dramatic and beautiful death I've ever seen. Now, my grandma's was pretty good too. My grandma's was very peaceful. And she just kind of, you know, I said the Lord's Prayer with her, and she said it was beautiful. And yeah, she died at home. She just basically passed away, you know, peacefully, like she was going to sleep. So that's ideally how I would want to go, peacefully. God's will be done. You know, we don't have a choice. He knows what's best. So there's nothing like a clear conscience, is basically what the whole moral of the story is. And if you don't have one, you might want to start working on it, because it doesn't come quickly or easily. And I've learned that the hard way. I've done a lot of crazy stuff in my life, and I was the typical prodigal son, rebellious preacher's kid, and I've come full circle. So, and now I'm struggling to clean myself up. So, pray for me, a sinner. God bless. Over and out.